Train her there? Unlikely. Unlikely. She would have had to have been done as a child like the rest of us, I'm sure. I highly doubt that she was trained there.
Was Marilyn age regressed when she got there, and did she have alters?
Was she age regressed? Yeah, I mean, not maybe when she got there. I don't know. Because again, I wasn't there when she first got there. They adjusted people's ages all the time. You were whatever age they needed you to be in the moment. There was no way to tell what age someone actually was or anything like that. Did she have alters? I'm sure. I don't recall seeing them, but I'm sure. Like, she must have.
Any particular missions she did that stands out, or a story with her that can be told?
Missions, I remember going with her in what I believe was Marrakesh, tracking down a small group of aliens in hiding underneath the city, and she was quite remarkable in finding them with her skills. It's foggy. Most of the clear memories of her are from Kyle's era.
You said Norma Jean was extracted. What about their funerals and so on? Bruce Lee suddenly came to mind with his untimely and mysterious passing.
I'm not quite sure what you mean. I guess they bury an empty coffin, or they put in a clone that has died and bury that. That's also quite possible. Bruce Lee suddenly came to mind with his sudden and mysterious passing. Yeah, I would be quite shocked if he wasn't. I don't have memories of him, but it would be quite surprising to me because he not only had his martial arts skills, but he was known to be quite psychic. So, yeah.
When you said it was the real Marilyn, how could you tell?
Because she remembered everything. She remembered being in all those movies. She remembered the songs she had sung. She remembered all those things, and there were no physical differences whatsoever. Clones, they usually put in one or two subtle differences, like they might change the shade of the eyes or something like that. But she was identical in every way visually, so there was no mistaking it.
Do you remember how the Taiwanese SSP deal with Norma Jean happened? Can you briefly talk about this group?
I don't know how it came about exactly. I assume it was one of those things of them combing through the facility and finding her at some point and then extending an offer, and she finally took it after Camp Hero fell, and she decided to leave the program along with most of the people who had been there for decades. Kyle was the only one that I know of who stayed behind. Talk about that group. Okay, they're called the Hong Long Red Dragon. They were formed from some of the top military people who fled to Taiwan after the Chinese Civil War. They allied themselves with the Germans in space and the Japanese in space, meaning they're actually several years older than the American SSP. I don't know that much about them. They're very, very secretive and isolationist, I guess you could say. I've interacted with them a few times, but they don't reveal too much.
All right, Shirley Temple.
Shirley Temple, okay. I've put here, I think she may have been partially the inspiration for 11, because she was skilled with telekinesis and she did operate the chair also. She was one of what we called the few, because there were extremely few. I've mentioned before, I believe, 2 million children, and there were 70 who could operate the chair. So she was a child, and she transferred out, like most people did. She transferred out when she was around 11, or maybe even younger, maybe like 9, but which is what most people did. Most people were not there for decades. That's a thing that should be cleared up. Most people came and went with numbing frequency. But yeah, I remember seeing her in the cages at the same time that Alex was. So she was brought forward from the 1930s, I guess, to 1963 for the...
Okay, Marilyn Dietrich.
What I remember about Marlene Dietrich is that she worked in the scientific department. She was quite brilliant. She was just an evil bitch. She was very anti-Semitic, I remember that, and she would beat her employees, which of course her employees were mostly children, of course, that she had gotten a hold of from the kids who were there. And that's the main thing I remember. I remember her actually doing some kind of research into, she specialized in planetology, basically, and I remember her doing research into bioforming people temporarily, creating nanites that could bioform people temporarily so that they could live on an inhospitable planet for a time, which of course was quite useful. I can't remember how successful. I think she had limited success in this endeavor, and then she left Camp Hero, and I don't know what happened after that. She wasn't there but maybe 2 or 3, 4 years in total, and this was during Alex's time. I have knocked-off-in memories of her that I could just describe briefly. I think it may have been the same alter of hers, because the character and personality were the same, where she was, again, quite anti-Semitic, and got reported for it, actually, and got in quite a lot of bureaucratic hot water because of that.
Okay, Cary Grant.
My memories of Cary Grant are all from Kyle's time, but since we're on this subject anyway, I guess I can go ahead with it. He was brought forward from whenever he was a child, I guess the 1920s, or maybe even before then. And he was one of the boys who Kyle looked after and raised. He did not transfer out after a couple of years like most people did. He stayed for God knows how long. Or it may have been a clone of his that was age regressed to a child. I don't know. He was actually very sweet, which was a rare thing in that, law of the jungle place that was Camp Hero, which was because he actually had a privileged position. He was a time oracle, was what we called them. They were the ultimate remote viewers. They functioned like a looking glass. They could look anywhere in time or space, past, present, future, and in any timeline, just like a looking glass device, and which we did not have one. And previously we had had to send someone to see what changes we had made and all of that. But when we had the time oracles, they could simply remote view this stuff, and so they were so valuable. They were treated like spun glass, and Cary Grant, or whatever his alter was no exception. Yeah, that's about. There are some other things that are about him, but they're really, really personal. They'll be in the book, but I just don't feel quite right saying them in an interview.
I think we need to touch upon the Stranger Things story. I heard you say the characters were based on some people you knew at Montauk. Do you remember any other cases of Hollywood or other entertainment projects being associated with Camp Hero so deeply? Do you remember Hollywood producers coming to Camp Hero to find stories for movies or TV shows?
I can't say who most of these characters are. I know who they are. Some of them are in the community, some are not. I cannot say, other than that 11, I believe. The character was ripped off of what Shirley Temple was. The incident was ripped off of someone else, which was the Junior incident. And I will tell you right now, Duncan Cameron did not summon Junior. I will tell you that in no uncertain terms, he did not do that. That was not his doing. I am in daily communication with the man who did, and maybe someday he will be public. I doubt it, but for now, his name will not be revealed. And other things so deeply associated with Camp Hero, I would say Stargate SG-1 was quite heavily inspired by it. I would say the TV series Dark Angel was inspired by it, and I would say that, Timeless, which was a fairly recent show, actually. Timeless. Yeah, that show, I would say, was heavily associated with it. I Do you remember Scouts? I don't remember producers as such. I remember Holly. Yeah, that show, I would say, was heavily associated with it. I do you remember Scouts. I don't remember producers as such. I remember Hollywood Scouts, like location scouts, except these were more like story scouts, I guess, who would come interview people, sometimes even sketch out like storyboards and things like that. And there was an interview board that they would go in front of once the script was finished and they were about to sell it to the studio, to make sure that they hadn't gotten too close, but also that they hadn't gotten too far, because to an extent there's some universal law that the truth has to be told, but that it can be passed off as fiction. And if people don't know that what they think is fiction is real, then that counts as consent, which is a completely horseshit law, but that is how it's thought of. So, yeah.
Okay, did you see Mark Hamill at Montauk?
I have a few memories of Mark Hamill at Montauk. Not very clearly what he did. I think he mostly just liaisoned with the Greys who worked there. I don't recall ever seeing him on ops or anything. And so, I didn't know him very well, but I do remember.
And I know that you also saw David Bowie briefly there.
Right, okay, about Bowie. My memories of him are that he was a diplomat, much in the same field and occasionally alongside Heinrich. And once or twice he did show up at Camp Hero, but that was, again, only once or twice. He was pretty decent at his job, as diplomats go. I don't know what his origins are. He's very visibly not baseline human. Like, he's maybe the most obvious hybrid I've ever seen in my life, but otherwise, and all of his songs are about being an alien. I doubt that he actually wrote anything that he sang, like most of them. Although I know he did co-write the song that is now called Space Oddity. The original title was not that. That's a really stupid title. The original title was just Ground Control to Major Tom, because that's, the main lyric of the chorus. I guess that's about it.
Let's touch upon Janis Joplin's story again, and can you talk about her performance in the New Atlantis colony and how it came about?
I guess I can tell her origin story. I've mentioned they had people going around in time and scouting for people to be used, or that they would be provided with lists from people planted throughout history with people to use. In the original timeline, Janis was born on August the 11th or 12th, 11th of 1917, I think. Her name was Alice Ann Trent at birth, but after she eventually got married to a man by the name of Bobby McGee and became Alice Ann McGee. You know that song, Me and Bobby McGee? That's what that's about, which she sang, by the way. But at any rate, she and her husband were both extremely psychic, and they made their living. They were hobos during the 1930s, during the Great Depression, and they made their living by traveling the country, doing palm readings and other psychic things, and also singing. And, of course, when they were found, they were both just way too good to pass up, so they time-traveled back to when they were children and grabbed them. The Project Phoenix people did. Picked them up and erased them from history and gave them entirely new histories in completely different time periods. I don't even know who Bobby McGee was. I think they made him into a complete nobody, and she became Janis Joplin. That's her origin story. How the concert on New Atlantis came about exactly, I don't know. It was in 1969. I don't know if it was our 1969. It was 1969 on New Atlantis, but it was an absolutely magnificent thing in the Volkshalle, constructed after the Volkshalle that was meant to be built in Albert Speer's vision of Berlin, but it was considerably bigger. It held something like 900,000 people, and it was filled to capacity that night. In fact, it might have even been a bit beyond capacity, because I remember there were people bribing the door guards to get in and be able to stand and listen. And she sang a number of songs, but the one that she closed the night with was Hallelujah, which that was the first time that song had ever been heard in front of an audience. And it was, I don't even have words to describe the way that she sang that song. It was just almost supernatural, the effect that it had. And this place was designed with perfect acoustics so that even the most distant seats from the stage could hear everything just as well as if they were on the front row. Yeah, it was one hell of an experience, that was.
Anyone else of the celebrities?
Well, I could talk about the two singers, the two Hong Kong singers. One was Danny Chan. He was there in Alex's period, and the other was Anita Moy, who was from Kyle's era. Danny Chan, I know he was there since a child. I know that most of his music is stolen. There will be some stuff about it in my book, about some of his music. That's kind of beyond the scope of this, to tell all the stories. And the other one whom I could talk fairly at length about is Anita Moy. So her story begins actually in Vietnam in the 1870s when it was colonized by the French. But a lot of Montauk, when we were doing our scouting, one of the places we would go to frequently was the royal family of Vietnam, who by that time were completely powerless. They just were there for show. But they were still who the people looked to. So they did have a certain access to the inner lives of people there that the French did not. And so we would go there to the royal houses and would receive a list of people who we could pick up and take in exchange for gifts to the emperor and empress and the imperial family, which included they were usually alien artifacts or they were objects from the far future. What to them was the far future, what might have been modern or even outdated to you and I. You know, the fluidity of time is a weird and wonderful thing here. But eventually, one of the names that showed up on this list was the Cheng family, who were Chinese migrant workers from the south of China who had been brought by the French to help build the railway. They were, I guess the historic term would be coolies. And they were known, several of the women served as oracles, Chinese oracles, so they were psychic. They came from a long line of them, actually. And the men were psychic as well, but there wasn't really such an outlet for that in that society. But we took the couple and we took their 7 daughters. They had 7 daughters. I didn't have any sons, but they were rather ahead of their time, actually, especially for that society, for Chinese migrant workers in Vietnam. They were quite ahead of their time. They, instead of just marrying their daughters off when they were really young, they actually had their daughters educated or educated them at home and made them employable and useful in society, which was, quite rare. And one of them was I believe she was the second youngest. They were all between the ages of, there have been a couple of sets of twins. They were all between the ages of 3 and 14 or thereabouts, and she was maybe 5. Her English name was Iridia Cheng, or in her Chinese name, Cheng Li Hua. And these two became Anita Moy. This was in the early 1870s. She would have been born in the late 1860s, I guess. And they wound up scattered. I'm sure they all were mind-wiped and then sent to wherever they were stationed. And one of her clones was eventually sent into Hong Kong to become this singer and to sing songs from the project, a lot of them, from various projects. And after the fall of Camp Hero in '86, she left, and she opened up a nightclub on planet Centurion called the Wild Blue Yonder. And it is a spy hub now, and she transferred to Knoxwaffen, and they put her up to this. And so she spies for them now, gaining the trust of American officers who attend that club and getting them drunk and or into bed and pumping them for information. And she still performs there to this day. That's basic of her story. There's going to be quite a lot more stuff in my book. Again, that's going to be one hell of a story.